So hi, everybody. Sorry, the last session. I'm glad you're still here. If I have to describe myself in this context, I'm probably an analog biologist. So I'm going to keep my comments to the minimum and talk to the experts here. I would like you to focus, and what we would like to do is, or what I would like to do is to bring all of these discussions a little bit home. Let's focus. In the first place, the context is South Africa, please. And we want to talk about where do we go from here with AI in biotech in South Africa, and how do we collaborate? Maybe if we say, how do we collaborate? Why should we collaborate as well? So you've already met, I must get your names here. Sorry, I think I'm going to need some water. Jason already spoke. Then Sipho, Gert, and Arno, I asked them that to start off the session, we're going to do thank you so much, in the first 3 or so minutes, please just quickly introduce yourself. And in the context that I just referred to, just say a little bit about how you are involved in biotech AI in the context from where you are. Thanks.
Yeah, perfect. So I'll go first. Arno Smit, I'm one of the co-founders of Biocertica. I've got a background in engineering, design, entrepreneurship. I've worked in kind of like multiple platforms ranging from aviation to fintech, and now obviously in health tech. And our role really in terms of like AI and biotech is getting down to that kind of like precision recommendations and purely understanding what happens inside of you as an individual to help really prioritize or recategorize products based on your genetics.
Yeah, cool. So Gert here. My role is, my background is actually in finance. I was a hedge fund manager at one of the large institutional investors, and one of my close friends passed away at the age of 40. And I think maybe I had a bit of a moment and reevaluating my life and actually going into precision medicine and seeing all the advances happening in genetics specifically. There's one thing I do know is that's definitely a growth industry, and the type of advancements that we will see is basically science fiction-like. So that's something that really excites me, and you can take a position on the market on stocks, but you can't really have an impact in the market. So I chose to give up that job and actually create a startup, Biocertica. Actually just found out we won a grant from Bill and Melinda Gates yesterday, so it's all good. So we're on the right track, I'm sure, to deploy our solutions in Africa, so it's good. So yeah, here today to essentially just tell you a bit more about how we experienced AI thus far in building our startup. Yeah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sipho Dikweni. I'm with the Technology Innovation Agency. My background is in applied remote sensing and computer science. I spent some time with the National Space Agency, and then I decided to venture into the creation of new ventures as well as the commercialization of intellectual property. So now I'm within the ICT, within the Technology Innovation Agency. I regard myself as very lucky because I get to deal with first-hand of these innovations, especially when it comes to AI. We build not only the AI technology, but the infrastructure as a whole, starting from connectivity to actually general artificial intelligence that can be applicable to any other industries. But we also have some of the innovations within the ICT that are specifically to biotech. If I can mention just a few, we have one which is medical diagnostic tool for breast cancer using AI-based technologies. We're also working with Cape Bio, developing an AI-based platform for identifying and classification of biologics which are novel, such as proteins, as well as peptides and peptides for actually therapeutics as well as diagnostics. So I took interest in this discussion as we talk about collaboration, which is key if South Africa is to actually reap the benefits of artificial intelligence. So it's very important that we position ourselves. And it's not only about technologies or about B2B collaborations, but how do we bring the society, how to bring people who are actually building these innovation and researchers, as well as how do people get to actually align themselves and collaborate with these systems that we are actually building. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
You're welcome, obviously, to introduce yourself again a little bit. But can I ask you to immediately go over and tell us a little bit about how you think we're actually going to establish these communities of collaboration in South Africa, according to you?
Cool. So I'm Jason Hlozek. I wear two hats. I'm a postdoc, and on the one hand, I work within an academic group, so working with students, supervising projects. And on the other hand, I'm more in wear an industry hat. So H30 itself is more of an industry-directed organization. And my background is as a computational chemist, so working more in the molecular dynamics world, and now having transitioned to AI. And then quickly to answer one of your first questions, which was sort of why collaborate. I think in the AI space, AI needs an application, so something where it can make a difference. And that's obviously very helpful to the experimentalist. But also selfishly, AI needs validation. So to get that experimental corroboration for your methods is also really helpful. And I've found that it's relatively rare in academic settings to have data science skill sets within a very hardcore science world. Normally it's very specialized in the biology or chemistry worlds. And so often that gap can be bridged by having collaborations that fill both roles, where both parties are getting very real, tangible rewards. So then to answer your second question is, I don't know if there's a one-size-fits-all answer, but what's been really helpful for us, I think, is having someone on the ground to take those tools, the more technical aspects of the tools, and make them more accessible to our experimentalists. As has been mentioned in a previous panel with the job security aspect, I often get asked the question, oh, so you're the one that's going to develop the tool that takes my job. And even if it's just a joke, I think it's still very telling about what's on people's minds when they approach this. And I was thinking, ironically, having a human face to introduce the AI tools is actually very helpful, but also problems are very different to each other and what experimentalists need. And I don't think the traditional approach of having a solution off the shelf and just trying to take it and apply it to a problem is leveraging the full use and capabilities of AI, which is very adaptable and flexible. And if you can have someone on the ground adapting those tools, understanding the data and what it can do for you, that's a very powerful approach, or at least as we've experienced.
I think one of the things that we definitely need to work on is this idea that AI is robotics and the robot is going to take over my job. It's a very, obviously, one-dimensional look at it. Gert, can I quickly jump back to you, and if you can just give us, some of your thoughts on how you think AI in biotech specifically is going to evolve in the South African context in the foreseeable future, which sounds like it's the next 2 months.
Yeah, no, I think it's exponential growth rate there. So I think ultimately AI needs an application, and that application needs utility within the market. And utility is a point of perspective. It might differ across various subsectors of the society. Someone sitting in a shack somewhere in Ulundi, having to give up a day's worth of wages to go to a hospital to get some medicine. I think the utility value for them to use an AI doctor is much higher for a physician sitting in Paul in Valdivia Estate who's got liability issues if he's using this AI as a co-pilot. So the utility function should outweigh the risk. So I think the adoption rate specifically in South Africa can be very high. And if you look at GPT models, yes, they've been trained in the US and Europe and China. All of those places have some sort of regulation, and you'll be using first derivative of that regulation here. So I think everybody can relax for 5 seconds on regulations. It's more the implementation thereof, right? So ultimately, GPT models are commoditized. Low-code environments will actually increase the amount of startups. You've seen that young guy sitting here. He's already taken Google's ML model. He didn't do anything for that. He can just spin up an instance in AWS and actually use Bubble to provide some sort of solution out into the market. So on balance, I think it will be a high adoption rate in South Africa, solving real problems real quick. We'll get to regulation a bit later on. Got some thoughts on that as well.
Okay, perfect. Sipho, I quickly want to jump back to you, and without going into all the details of what TIA offers, I would like you first to generally just answer what do you think is necessary for South African AI to make it successful. One of the things that's milling in my head is everybody and previously as well, most people are just talking about the health. What about agriculture and other types of biotech environment? Nobody's brought up environmental type of issues. I don't know exactly, if you can talk to all of the points, you're welcome to say if there's something that you don't cover. But yeah, just tell us, what do you think we need? And then maybe just quickly, again, without the details, but just how do you think an organization like TIA can actually enable South Africans to get there?
So I'll start this way. One of the questions that I always ask myself, which is very important, what am I investing in, especially when I'm dealing with AI? So this is very important. That's the question that we need to ask ourselves, because oftentimes we're excited about the accuracies of what you're talking about, but we don't know what is being fed. What are we feeding these models to give us these outputs that we're looking for? So it's very important that we pay close attention to that. But the biggest challenge that we're going to have looking forward and how we should be positioning ourselves is to invest in security. Very important, because that's the key important thing, especially dealing with very sensitive data that you're dealing with now. How do you ensure that we have systems that are able to prevent any issues that may affect or actually put people's lives at risk? The cybersecurity component is very important. Not only that, we also need to have the base layer, because we need this to be accessible to everyone. If we don't have access to communication technology, it's going to be difficult to take these technologies to the ground and actually get to help the people that need them. We need to have proper systems in place. It is only then now we can actually say, okay, I'm developing a crop watch system to actually look into my farm, wherever I'm at, without me having to be there. This is very important. I'm optimizing my yields using AI. Those are the things that we have to follow, but TIA has to play a role to ensure that we direct the development of the technologies with what we've already built. The base layer is very important for us. And also, if we're talking about this, I'll just make an example, one example that I've made. So there's one company that we invested on called MedSol AI. They actually focusing on diagnosis, early diagnosis of breast cancer. So what they have done, they've made sure that they push this technology to the rural communities to ensure that everyone can quickly get access to medication or easily diagnose if there's any issues. But not only did they do that, there has a component of actually upskilling the people in the community to teach them about the early signs of this breast cancer and all those things. So those are the kind of things. We won't only focus on the technology, we have to move with the society as we go.
So, Arno, you and I quickly spoke before about, that you two that started the company, or work there at least now, don't really have a biotech background or whatever you need, coding or whatever on the AI side. So if we want to talk about the future of AI in South Africa, in the context of biotech, we probably have to talk about training in some way. So can you give me your perspective on how do you get into, being a role player in that space? And it's from your perspective. Obviously, we can now go and look for somebody that presents a course at university or whatever. But you sitting on the development side, and I think it's very important that we see that perspective. So what would you tell if somebody's here thinking of, sending their children or watching a video and say, what should I do to be an AI specialist in biotech?
Well, I think it's got to be around experimentation and around kind of like curiosity. Human beings are naturally kind of like curious and wanting to either figure out new innovations or, figure out some sort of like a solution to a problem in something. And I think in order to understand, just the sheer capacity of something like generative AI or AI in biotech, you need to kick the tires a little bit, and we need to dig our hands into it and really see what can we do with it. For instance, one of the things that we've been playing around at Biocertica is particularly looking at the sheer amount of work that someone like a nutritionist needs to do when they are interpreting genetic data. So, for instance, one of the things that we're looking at is saying, like, how do you take genetic data, which is obviously what you inherited from your parents and from your forefathers, how do you take and substitute self-reported lifestyle data and put it up with, you know, things like wearables? And how do you take phenotype data as well to get one of the most complete pictures of a customer to help them understand what goes into it, and how do you then apply that in a day-to-day basis in order to take that a little bit forward? Now, it's not something that we have which is actively out there, but we've been kind of like trialing it with some of our nutritionists on hand to see how much more effective can we actually make them. Because when they sit and look at that data, it takes them about 45 minutes just to do the homework before they even see a patient. And then when they look at the genetic data, there's obviously a follow-up plan as well. Like, what are the types of products, or, you know, training regimes, or whatever it is that they need to do. So we try and shortcut that. And instead of saying it's like a, you know, an autopilot, it is a little bit more of a co-pilot, because you've got certain, you know, aspects on there where you see what is the feedback, you know, the text that has been generated, how much of that actually gets changed before someone then basically submits that information to see the efficacy of it and the quality of it. And I believe that, first of all, you need to establish quality before you can go into kind of like a quantitative setting. And that's really just what, you know, we're doing in terms of like experimenting, kicking around, and, you know, then you just need to kind of like use the masses to help you fine tune some of that model as well, because you don't want to sit and feed in a bunch of biased data. So.
Because while you have the microphone, what I understand is you refer to the training that so you have an AI-based product, and now you can use AI in some way. It's probably because we're too close to each other. You can use AI to train, it's not the final consumer, but your nutritionist, for example. It's an intermediary user. So that's a very interesting interface, I think. So one of the things that I want to touch on there is then, what is our responsibilities? Everybody sitting here and everybody that spoke before are proponents of AI. And we will continue with doing that. But what's our responsibility? And I'm not talking about the big ethical and the regulatory issues, but that immediate interaction, your responsibility to your immediate client, for example.
You know, I think we bear a massive responsibility, and instead of saying that and in all honesty, you know, we're not a Facebook, we're not an Instagram, we're at no level where we're sitting on the amount of kind of like users where we could even potentially have a devastating effect. But I think it is in every company's responsibility that you need to, again, let's talk about guardrails, where you need to hold back a little bit, you need to fine tune these things, and you need to get the qualitative feedback before you start releasing that to a little bit more of a broader public. And I think this is something that tech companies do quite well, is that they run experiments on a small scale, that they A/B test it, that they fine tune it before they actually release it to a larger set of the public.
Just before I continue, I'm not going to have a long speech at the end to conclude. So I'm going to use the time that I had there basically for this discussion, but I would like to get the audience involved as well. So is there any question at the moment? If there's not one now, please think about something. I will come back to you again. Sabri and Henry, there's two questions. Can I please ask you ask both and then...
Yeah, I'm very interested in Biocertica, because the inferences that we effectively make, taking the physiological data with the genetic data, is really interesting. But then what's the role of a genetics counselor, right? Which I think is legislated and a requirement effectively in that process, because you still have to be able to take the data, analyze it, and give some sort of recommendation with regard to lifestyle or whatever, okay, depending on what was inherited or whatever the case may be. So I'm very interested to understand, like, the AI can do the calculation, probably give you a probability of something being a risk, and then, but somebody still has to look at that and say, tick box or whatever. Thanks, man.
Henry.
First of all, I find this workshop very interesting, and it's really great, some awareness about AI, and I think to a certain extent I understand, you know, its application to problem solving. But one of the questions I have is, like you mentioned, the nutritionists, the workload, and then maybe AI can assist them to make a faster analysis of what their patient requires based on genetic data, right? I also heard earlier that a lot of these AI tools is in the public domain. They're open source. But if I have a problem, right, and I want to try and see if AI would be an appropriate tool to solve the problem, what do I need, first of all, to select an appropriate AI tool and then to customize it so that it can suit my purposes? I mean, I'm just an aging biologist at the end of his career. I still have a bit of interest or curiosity, very little, to try it out. So what must I do? Can you help me? Thank you.
So I'll start with the genetic counselor. So I think in South Africa, I'm glad you brought that up. There's a severe shortage of genetic counselors in South Africa. So if anything, helping these genetic counselors to shorten their workload is definitely within the domain of AI expertise. And obviously, anybody who's used ChatGPT-4 knows that it's not 100% accurate 100% of the time, right? So you have to solve that. So it can only be like a co-pilot to these professionals at this stage to shorten the workloads, as it's done with radiology currently. So I don't know if you want to take the biology one.
I mean, I just want to add on that I really want to put the emphasis on it, that it's not about replacing, it's about assisting. It is really on that emphasis in terms of like, we want to make sure that if we're going to be creating more jobs, how can we be more effective? How can we be more productive? And if you can say 45 minutes can be replaced by 5 minutes of kind of like crunching data, getting some sort of like suggested recommendations, getting all of that genetic information, tying it up with e-commerce products and having some sort of like a one-click solution where you can get your meal plans delivered to you on a bi-weekly basis, that is an excellent way of saving someone a lot of time that is currently being done through reading through PDFs, making their own summaries, and then afterwards having to kind of like apply their set of expertise in terms of crunching that data. So that's just the one part. It is really about assisting them and being that co-pilot instead of like just fully replacing the work which is out there. The second part of it in terms of tuning, I am definitely not the right person to ask.
So not to labor the point, but also to add on to the first question, I often just to approach the co-pilot aspect from a different angle. I often, when I work with our more technical, to be sure, staff, I always try and instill in them that it's not an excuse just because they're using this tool to turn off their critical thinking. As scientists, they are supposed to be critical thinkers by definition, and this is supposed to be another tool in their toolbox that can help them get to their goal more efficiently, but it's not an excuse to say, oh, the computer told me so and I did it. And I think that's maybe a very clear distinction. I don't know why that's maybe the go-to. Maybe it's because we think of computers as calculators and you type in a number and you get the answer. But yeah, I think AI is more of a sort of a flexible, a tool and a toolbox rather approach. In terms of what do you need to implement things, that's tricky. But I fully sympathize because I know just from personal experience trying to implement random tools that you find from literature, I think there's quite an emphasis on getting quality models and not a lot of emphasis put on adoption, facilitating adoption or easy implementation. I think that's maybe where having someone on hand to do that implementation or consult with is very helpful. Maybe that's not accessible to everyone. Otherwise, I would sort of really encourage the data science community to put a greater emphasis on that front-end development. Again, fully understand I'm a back-end developer. Front-end is not my love and passion, but it's really important for adoption. If people see this AI thing and they want to give it a try, and the first time they do it, it's such a user-unfriendly experience, you've probably lost another potential adoptee pretty soon on in the process because they're just going to carry on with how they're used to life. So it's not a full answer, but it's maybe just a partial a call to the data science community.
Henry, I think he says collaborate with somebody that's younger than you. So, Jason, while you have the microphone again, I want to ask, actually, can AI be a generalist? And what I mean with this is you develop medicine. Sipho is going to fund something in medicine, and he develops some, manual that's AI integrated. And all of your story together will be a success story for bio-innovation in South Africa. But I've been involved in bio-innovation over a long time, generally, on that broad level, not individual products. And we struggle to get that right, because bio-innovation in itself is a system. So would I be able to use AI to look at everybody's success and not so successful stories and develop a better model for bio-innovation in South Africa?
I think that's kind of the approach of science in general, where you look at what's been done before and based on your expertise and curiosity, you identify gaps that could be improved or could be explored and tweaked. I think there are a lot of good tools that have been, we've spoken a lot about data's bias. There's a lot of tools and data sets that are sort of more from global north or Caucasian populations. And for instance, that's a very strong gap that needs to be filled in the South African market. Yeah, maybe one day we'll have a scientific ChatGPT, and that can maybe do a better job at the scientific paper aspect. But yeah, I think it's still relatively requiring a manual approach on surveying the literature, seeing what's out there at the moment, at least. And
while you bring it up now, what is then the difference between scientific method, as you describe it now, and AI? Is it just the size of the data set?
So scientific, that's okay. So I think at its general sense, AI is anything that's mimicking human behavior. For sure, if you can get an appropriate training set and ask that right question of your model, perhaps you can make that line a little bit more blurred. But I would think, I don't know if there's any other comments from the panel to help me, but I think at the moment we also touched on the creative aspects of humanity, and I'm not quite sure we're there yet in terms of the scientific literature approach from AI.
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting question, but it goes back to the importance of human beings in everything that we do. We are the ones who are training these models, and the scientific impact also are coming from human beings. And for anything that we want to achieve, there's the importance of creativity, emotional intelligence that will be, and human ingenuity that is involved in what we're actually creating. That's the most important part. So we cannot separate AI completely. We cannot separate human beings from AI. They will always be there. There's something called human loop that we put in these AI developments. They have to fit. They are the ones who actually are the inputs. So most of the people who are pushing for collaborations, they're not only talking about from industry to industry. They're talking about human beings collaborating with these systems. It's called human AI-centric approaches that we're actually taking, because we can't get rid of human beings. For example, if one comes to me and say, I have this interesting concept, I'm going to be using AI for biological applications or whatever. I'm not from biological from biology sector. I need an industry domain expert who will tell me what are the acceptable standards for this. What are the acceptable biases for these models that people are actually coming up with? How do you look into the quality of the data? How do you ensure that this is acceptable? How representative is that data? So we'll always need that cross-industry collaboration in the process.
Perfect.
Maybe just a short distinction as well. My data friends will help me there. There's a very big difference between AI and general artificial intelligence. That the second one blew up New York and Los Angeles in Terminator 2, right? So AI is not there yet. So, yeah.
Quickly going back to you, any other questions before I start wrapping up? I have one more question for the panel before we move on, or to your final round, I should say. I heard that there's at least one of the ways that you can distinguish between all of these different products that we talk about is products that are based on AI, like your medicine again, or you can talk about things where AI is part of the offering, actually. And that second category for me is important, is continuous professional improvement that humans, for example, do. Will that always be part of that product? Because as you commercialize that, you will generate data from your product as well. Is this part and parcel of your improvement?
Yes, so there's no sense in building a GPT model from scratch. It costs millions to train it. So you can use that commoditized version and segregate data set above that, and that stays your data set. And then if you go back to the mathematics of neural nets, you will have to go in and have actually humans vet the answers, and that will actually train the model. So you will never be able to be completely rid of it. And then if you go down to genetics, ethnicity plays a markedly big role in terms of the outcomes. And there's a very big difference into the metabolizer status of certain drugs between European-based people and African-based people. And so the data set is not there for the African-based set yet. So you will never be fully disconnected from actually vetting your model purely from a mathematical perspective of your model. So in short. Yeah.
Perfect. Please.
If there's one thing that the public sector could do for this interface, what could it do? And I also work in the public sector, so it's fine if you say, get out the way. But seriously, what one thing could we do, or the government in general do, to help things move along?
Okay, cool. So the answer is very short. We should take a leaf out of what Dubai is currently doing with the industrialized zones there. They've got biohubs. There's certain tax advantages there. So if you really want to start collaborating, start there, create these hubs. Africa has a very rich biodiversity, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. People can capitalize on that data, and South Africa specifically is in a very good wicket, but you need those zones, and within those zones you need the capabilities, people from academia to work with business to make these solutions that's exportable to other countries and other jurisdictions. But without those sectors, what will happen is people will build ex-South Africa. South African people will have companies in Dubai set up or in Delaware like we have, and you build your IP ex-South Africa. So South Africa is missing a big opportunity here, and it takes a very, very short jump to actually short circuit that whole system.
I think that's an important point. Yeah.
Just to add to that, perhaps from a non-business standpoint, is I think an important part of what the public role could be is to incentivize open data principles. I'm hoping that all my technical people in the audience will commiserate with me that there's nothing more frustrating as a data scientist where you're trying to collaborate and you don't have data to build a model from, even if you're aware that that data actually exists, it's just being housed in IP protected silos. And I know it can be quite a difficult and tricky topic to navigate, but for instance, you mentioned Gates Foundation. I know in a lot of their infectious disease programs, they actually now start requiring open data principles within that. So even if it's not sort of completely publicly open, it's very much open within the Gates. Perhaps we've got a lot of consortia. For instance, there's a malaria-centric consortia or TB drug accelerator. And within that, there's a lot of data sharing principles. Or even if you take the more anonymized approach, Big Pharma clubbed together all of their libraries against malaria and created this open access model where the data is not publicly accessible, but it's a model trained on millions of malaria compounds. And if they can do it, I'm sure we can make a solution as well. And I think that's sort of letting you have multiple bites of the biscuit, because perhaps you're interested in your data for one particular aspect, but it could be very useful for something else. So maybe even if it's not just throwing it out into the public, some sort of willingness to share or incentivizing from a funding perspective or project perspective, funding or incentivizing that kind of openness or willingness to share and collaborate on data specifically.
You're opening a conversation there now again, Gert. You wanted to say something about regulation. I'm going to give you a chance now. earlier when we spoke about regulation, there was only reference, I think, to things that directly relate to AI. And I'm not, up to date with all the regulations, but the context where I come from, for example, under the Cartagena, or what is it called? The Biodiversity, Convention of Biological Diversity. There's a Nagoya protocol that's about access and benefit sharing, issues like that. And the new discussions around what they call digital sequencing information, to keep those. Are you, as practitioners in the broad biotech space, aware of these type of things? And how would that, because what you now spoke about is exactly that, access to information. What are your perspectives of this? Are we cutting off our own noses to spite somebody else by trying to keep the, the data for ourselves? And what we actually need to do is collaborate.
Collaboration is very important, but within the frame of personal data, right? We've heard that you can actually de-anonymize data. You can actually go as far, if I think the last numbers I saw is, if you sequenced about 15% of the population, you don't need to sequence anybody else. You can actually impute the rest of the data set. So if you take about, what's America now, 340 million people, there's give or take 40 million tests already done. So BlackRock's bought that for like $4.5 billion US. That's a fund manager, so they can actually extrapolate all of that data if you wanted to. Coming back to your immediate question, should we keep the data, or it's up to the owners of the data, and there you have to go to the constitution, who actually owns the data, and you need consent there, and you need to measure that consent, I think, throughout the process. That's very important. So this is where like blockchain tokenization and stuff like that really comes to the forefront, because if you want to ethically mine the data, you need to essentially get the consent thereof. So the data should not necessarily, the data sharing aspect should not necessarily be between the scientists and business, but actually the true owners of it. So, and that's mechanisms needs to be designed around that. I think more than actually collaboration. Once you sorted that out, collaboration will follow intrinsically. Yeah.
Fantastic. Can I ask you each to end up with 2 or 3 sentences on collaboration in South Africa? What would you like to see?
For the South African kind of like business economy to be a little bit less like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, where everything is just mine, and be a little bit more like Austin Powers from Austin Powers. And, it's a free-for-all. It's like everyone is welcome. That's my... Exactly.
Regulation is very important, but we should not regulate ourselves out of opportunity here as South Africa. So if you want to have like a risk model, look at finance. If you look at a stock of a company, it can go to 0 or it can go to infinity. So you have stock option pricing models where if you buy a call on that, it's more expensive than selling a call on it. Why? Because it can go down to 0. We've been all trying to estimate the risk of AI, and you can't estimate it because you don't necessarily know the intrinsic risk, because it's the scary monster. The reality is the stock of humanity can go to 0, right? So, but if you look at the benefits that you can gain from it, and looking at options pricing, there's a lot more to gain from this. I shouldn't say there shouldn't be regulation, but I think in chess, pawns goes first. EU regulates, US regulates. US is by far the most furthest ahead, and they want to enforce regulation on all the other countries, not necessarily to catch up. China's got regulation, they're not enforcing it. So, and you're going to be having derivative models of that in South Africa. So for 5 seconds, I think it's good to sit on the fence and see where this is going. And yeah, that's in short. And obviously collaboration is important. So we would like to speak to the scientists and scientists to speak to us. And it's like 2 different species. So we need to have like a common ground somewhere. Thanks.
Yeah, so I think transparency and ethical considerations are the key ingredients for successful collaboration. So we don't have to only, and we need to actually think about the IP implications of those causal collaborations, because they are very important, especially with this domain we're talking about. It's very important that we are very clear who owns what. We need to know clear controls of the IP and all those things. Also, the data privacy is very important. And also liabilities, I think we also need to open up discussions about that, especially when we're talking about AI systems. We have to be very clear who's liable for what. Thanks.
Yeah, I think just to echo as well, the whole inclusivity, being willing to and looking for collaborations to engage upon, trying to reduce that mindset of it's my data and what do you want with my data, but more of a what could you build with my data, what could I build with yours? So sort of a more mutual, beneficial kind of relationship, and looking for those opportunities would be, yeah.
Thank you so much. All that's left for me, can you just stay here? I'm just going to be quickly, thanks, to save time. I think all that's left for me officially first is to say thank you for the panel. Can you please just join me? Thank you so much. There was a huge amount of wisdom, I think, exchanged here today, and I hope somebody made notes or a recording or somebody. We can somehow, collate this and remember it, because if you're like me, 2 weeks from now, unfortunately, I forgot most of it. I think I heard a lot of things that I really love. In the first place is the energy. Henry already said, and I'm much younger than Henry, of course, but I love to see the young people here. I think the one thing that we should do something about is gender equality a little bit. So we need to see more women come in here. So think of that in your collaborations, and let's do that. And but the excitement that's there. But the excitement is also, it's grounded. There's a huge amount of value kind of base stuff that came from your discussion. And I love to hear that. We do not try, and often when you're in a regulatory space, people seem to suggest that we want to do something at all costs. And of course it's not. We're all part of the society. We're all part of a sustainable future. So I love to hear that. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming here, then broadly, just for the afternoon. We loved working with Uvu Bayer. Thank you so much. And Martina and Navid. I can't even see Navid. There he is, and Martina is back there. Thank you again for everything that you did. They did all the hard work, and the people that help you, thank you so much. And hopefully, to me, it's always about the practical stuff. This afternoon was just a lot of talk, and hopefully you have things that are interesting tonight when before you fall asleep. You're going to think about it, but the real value to me is the faces that you see here, the people that you see. So I'm going to make appointments to go and talk to people after this as well, because all of this, the little bit that I know about AI, is dangerous. But for the rest of the stuff, how do we make things succeed in South Africa? How do we contribute to, the national goals? So I love that. So please use the opportunity afterwards. Spend a little bit more time there. There's a few things that will keep you here, but it's actually the other people that keep you here. Thank you again for coming. Bye.